And there came one of the seven angels, which had the seven bowls or vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, Revelation 17, verse 1, I'll show unto you the judgment of the great harlot, of the great whore, that sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and all the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman all upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Where didst thou marvel? And I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. And the beast that thou saw was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder who the names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they beheld the beast that was and is not and yet is to come. I need somebody to read verses 9 to 18. Somebody help me out there.
Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, and 1 is, the other is not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. You want to go first?
Yeah, go all the way in.
Okay. And the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and the one is of 7, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horn which you saw are 10 kings. They have not received the kingdom yet, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. Okay?
All the way to the end.
Oh, you want me to go to the end?
Oh yeah, you're going good.
These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen of the faithful. And he said to me, The waters which thou saw where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to execute his purpose by having common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth.
Thank you, Marty. Let's go to God in prayer as we get our class together. Lord, as we do approach this section of Revelation, as we see your judgment upon a corrupt, abominable church, and pray, Father, that we be able to do fair interpretation of it and understand your direction and the lessons we can learn from it, to know you are a just and righteous God, and you put up with so much until you can't stand it anymore, and then you take care of things as they need to be. Thank you for your love, and thank you for your justice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Get a little closer to the mic.
Close to the mic.
Yeah, there you go.
Will Hodges, I want you to pass this out to everybody. This is a page we were going to give last week, and you didn't have time to get into it. And now we do. Well, give everybody a good old copy of this one. I'll share with you in Healy's handbook that Healy wrote back in the early 1900s.
That's the early version?
And in the earlier version, and I ordered a 1955 edition. I was going through and finding some of the early editions, and it was a 1962-63. They had a little paperback edition, and they knocked out about 200-300 pages of it to make it more abbreviated and a cheap book to give away at the Billy Graham Crusades. And a lot of the new revised eliminates a lot of the persecutions that happened against the Protestants. I was reading a section where it talked about how this village was like, or city was like 300,000 people, and by the time the Catholics got done with it, they're down to about 60,000, and they're all Catholic. All the Protestants were butchered, and that was the end of it. You know, the whole city was completely decimated. But in this is one section of notes from one of the editions, and I want you to look on page 774, first of all, and I'm going to share with you the darkest period of the papacy. Now, in our study here, we have the 7 angels and the 7 bowls, and they talk about the great harlot, the apostate church, sells herself for money. And as we go along, this is the depiction of the harlot of Revelation. And there's 7 basic messages of judgment, and these messages are God's judgment upon this woman who was drunk with the blood of God's people, and the blood of those who bore testimony were martyrs for Christ. Now, according to the historicist view, the prostitute is the corrupt Roman Catholic Church, including false Protestant churches that have come out of her. Her political and religious influence is carried by the beastly Roman papacy and the Western European culture. Now, that's the position I feel is probably one of the better positions. The preterist view is that the prostitute is Jerusalem, and her political and false religious influence is carried on by the Roman Empire, the beast, and the 7 heads are Rome, and the first 7 emperors. Nero the 6th of the emperors ruling at that time, with the 10 horns of the 10 imperial provinces. The futurist, or the premillennial view, is that the prostitute is a symbol of the false religious system, a new world religious order. The religious coalition will have political influence tied to the power of the beast, the Antichrist, and who is head of the alliance, the 10 horns, the 10 nations in Europe in the last days. And finally, the idealist is the prostitute is all false and corrupt religion that has allied itself with political power in order to dominate. God warns that such religion shall come to an awful end when true faith triumphs. So these are 4 interpretations of the 7 messages of judgment. Is the message from an angel, the vision. The message from the angel was one with great authority, and the announcement was Babylon has fallen. Now, people look at Babylon and we're looking at Iraq. But Iraq didn't land, Iraq and Iran didn't come to be until World War I, and the French and the British decided to divide these nations up over oil, of all things. World War I oil.
What else?
So what else are they going to fight over? And these countries didn't even exist, and now they exist. And the question comes up is Iraq and Iran, or Iraq itself between the Tigris-Euphrates River, is this the Babylon he's talking about? And yet we lean more that the Babylon in interpretation is usually referring more to Rome, in Rome, Italy. The message was from the voice of heaven as a call to God's people, God's judgment on Babylon, and then with the explanation that the message from the angel of the grave was one like this, called God's people. And it says, let me get on here. Come here, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot, and the great harlot will end with destruction. Come here, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. And throughout the Christian age, the harlot has been deceiving and forcing people to worship according to her desires. And then the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality with her, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality, and showing that the governments of the world are partners with this great harlot. And finally, in Revelation, the great harlot, Babylon, the great city, all refer to the apostate church. Now, he carried me away in the spirit of the wilderness, and I saw the woman sitting on the scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads, 10 horns. And the question goes in that these horns and heads are referring to religious powers and governmental powers. It wasn't until Napoleon crippled the papacy, that there was a break between the political Rome and the religious Rome. The papacy finally went its way, and you had Pope in Ravenna ruling for a number of years, and the Pope in Rome, Italy ruling for a number of years. What did the Pope at Rome have the audacity to call the Pope in Avignon province? What did he call the Pope? What kind of name did he throw at him?
I want to say the devil, but
Almost.
I know it's not.
Antichrist?
The what now, Sandy?
Antichrist?
Antichrist.
Looks like Tom wins the cigar. It is the Antichrist. Thank you, Tom. And the Pope at Avignon, meanwhile, put his fists on his hips. And you know what he called the Pope in Rome, Tom? Guess what he called him back? Tom?
Called the devil.
Well, almost. You're right the first time.
The Antichrist.
Called him the Antichrist again. Now, Mike Kennedy, one of my co-teachers in Jamaica, had to remind me that throughout the book of Revelation, the word Antichrist is nowhere used at all in the whole book of Revelation. We read in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, in the epistles of John, he says the Antichrist is already at work. And so 2,000 years ago, John said the Antichrist is already at work. I shared with the class after I did a little looking at Peter the Great. Peter the Great of Russia had the audacity to have the church bells removed from the belfries, and they're a high quality iron. In Morty they made cannon out of them that had a bigger range and farther range because they could put more gunpowder in them, and so they're able to beat up on their enemy. If they were fighting the Turks or whatever, they could put them under control because the Russian cannon had a farther range because they're made out of good iron melted down from church belfries. But whenever he ordered the gold to be taken, or the iron to be taken out of the church belfries, the leaders of Russia took them into a secret treasury, and they opened up cask after cask, these big old pirate's chests full of gems and gold, more gems and more gold. And he says, well, now you do not have to tax the church. He said, I'm going to tax the church anyway. And so he taxed the church, even though they unveiled to him all the wealth that was squirreled away for a rainy day. And he melted down all those cannon because he wanted to bring Russia into a victorious position and build a naval fleet. But you know what they called Peter the Great when he taxed the churches and melted all the iron bells down and made cannon out of them? You know what they called him, Harry?
No.
They called him the Antichrist. So that name has been thrown around quite a bit. And of course, I shared with you some weeks ago, they even had one on the internet. Guess who the latest candidate for being the Antichrist happens to be? Who, Morgan? Who? Obama, yeah. Somebody had the audacity to call our fine upstanding president the Antichrist. You know,
Oh, yeah.
that's just not being fair. Now, Mr. Obama went to Jamaica. And while Mr. Obama was in Jamaica, this Rastaman asked, Mr. President, and he spoke in a very patois kind of dialect. And he said, Mr. President, we are growing hemp here in Jamaica. And I want to know about, to get us out of our poverty, our chances of finding a hemp market for marijuana in the United States. And Mr. Obama says, wouldn't you ever imagine I was going to run into a question like that while I'm out here doing a tour? This was about 3 months ago. He was there about a week before we got to Jamaica a couple trips ago. And he said there's only 2 states in the United States that are experimentally trying to promote marijuana. And he says it's going to depend on how sober and how clear-minded the populace are, whether the crime rate goes down or goes up, to see whether it's going to catch on in the rest of the country. But it says for right now, in the unforeseeable future, it's not going to happen. So don't think America is going to be a good market for your hemp plant. So that's what Mr. Obama had to say. So I thought I'd share that with you for your benefit, to let you know that Mr. Obama has some sense when he talks to these guys in Jamaica.
He was
They're
probably
trying to sell
lying.
their hemp crop to Florida and other states.
Then he opened his mouth about
And on her forehead was the name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots, and of the Abominations of the Earth. And we have Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots, and the religious practicing that is not according to Scripture, generally is spiritual fornication. But let's go back to it. Now, page 774. Adrian II, John Marianus with the popes began the darkest period of the papacy, 870 to 1050. The 200 years between Nicholas I and Gregory VII is called by historians as the midnight of the Dark Ages. The midnight of the Dark Ages, Glenn. Bribery, corruption, immorality, and bloodshed make it just about the blackest chapter in the whole history of the church. Adrian, Stephen, Formosus, Boniface, Stephen, Romanus, Theodore, John, Benedict, Leo, and Christopher. This was called the rule of harlots. Sergius said to have had a mistress, Marozia. She, her mother Theodora, and her sister filled the papal chair with their paramours and bastard sons and turned the papal palace into a den of robbers. Called in history the rule of the harlots, 904 to 963. Anastasius III, Lando, John 10, was brought from Ravenna to Rome and made pope by Theodora. You know why? For the more convenient gratification of her passion. Now, I told you this to tell you this. My son was working over here at one of the motels, and they had this guy that was working in the food service that was absolutely useless. And the new food service manager fired his family. He says, "You're out of here, you're fired." Well, the lady who owns the hotel, the Ramada Inn Hotel from India, came back and says, Where's Pete? What do you mean, where's Pete? Where's Pete? Well, he's useless. I said, "Where's Pete?" "I fired him." "You're fired." "My boyfriend." "You don't fire my boyfriend. I don't care how good a worker he is or isn't." So my son became food service manager after he got fired. And that, of course, happened in our godly city here of Lakeland, Florida. You know, things like that don't happen in other towns, only in ours, right?
Right.
But here, this lady brought the Pope in important because she wanted her boyfriend to be close to her. Now, isn't this almost like Peyton Place? Isn't this almost like, you know, the, what do they call this? The conniving mistresses, or some of these, you know, two's company, three's a crowd kind of stuff you get on TV?
History has more of soap opera than any soap opera that ever
Oh my. I hate to tell you, Sharon, you know what the three biggest causes of housewife depression? ABC, NBC, and CBS.
I can believe that.
While the stomach turns. Oh, I mean while the world turns. You know. While the stomach churns, Will. But you know, Will, for some little old ladies, you can't take them away from their soap operas, because getting off their soap operas is like getting off an addiction. That they'll have these withdrawal. And if for somehow the power goes out and they lose their cable, if they have a dish, they moan and groan like,
All nursing homes.
oh my, you hear it.
Ooh, boy.
Anyway, so Merzia happened to be, this pope was made pope by Theodora for the more convenient gratification of her passion. He was smothered to death by Merzia, who then in succession raised to the papacy Leo the VI and Stephen the VII and John the XI, her own illegitimate son. Another of her sons appointed the four following popes: Leo VII and Stephen the VIII and Martin the III and Agapetus II and John the XII. The grandson of Merzia was guilty of almost every crime, violated virgins and widows and high and low, lived with his father's mistress, made the papal palace a brothel. Well, that means a cat house, house of prostitution. Was killed while in the act of adultery by the woman's enraged husband. Oops, there goes the Pope. Killed by the I mean, this is terrible. In the scripture, there is one guy, his name was Jehu, and this one man was fornicating with a woman, and he grabbed a spear and stuck him through the back and her through the belly. It's in scripture. And Jehu talked about the zeal of my house. Now, I wondered if this is a way to break this nonsense of the garbage fornication and the shacking up and the illegitimacy and all the stuff, all the garbage going on. If some zealous Levite or a judge decides to take a spear and put it through his back and her through her belly and pin him to the ground. You know who ends up going to jail? The guy wielding the spear.
Right.
Depths of papal degradation, bottom of the page 774. Leo and John and Benedict and Donus and Benedict and John and Boniface murdered Pope John XIV and maintained himself on the blood-stained papal throne by a lavish distribution of stolen money. The Bishop of Orleans referred to John 12, Leo and Boniface. He called them monsters of guilt, reeking in blood and filth, Antichrist sitting in the temple of God.
Sounds
Now
like a
remember, we're
politician.
talking about mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots, the abomination of the earth. Now, when you read Mr. Haley's history, you don't get this in the high school textbooks, already. But this is a Haley's handbook. We got back when I was 17 years old, went to Bible college. You know, that's where I got my first Haley's handbook. And we were sharing, Val, that in the 1960s, the Billy Graham organization got a hold of the book for massive distribution and pulled out 30 pages of this book because it offended the Catholics. And he ripped out 30 pages, or they just pulled 30 pages out to make it less threatening or less brutal or less intimidating, so that the Catholic priests would send their Catholic folks to the Billy Graham revival meetings, and then they stay good Catholics.
So
And that was kind of the thing. What's that now?
We actually have an altered version today.
Well, yeah, it's gone through revision, and I've been going through. I've been looking at Alabree's booksellers. I've been looking through eBay, and I ordered a 1955 copy. I'm trying to find the missing 30 pages. This book I have, Glenn, has got 968 pages. Your book has 680, doesn't it? Or 860.
Size too.
Okay, and it could be, but mine has like 968 pages. So this, mine was written, I think, approved in 1961, but it's gone through different revisions. Yeah, this is the 1961 edition, and maybe this one's the one I'm looking for, but I got to find the 30 missing pages. I was going to run them all off and throw them at you if I can ever find them, but I haven't found them
Be
yet.
careful, I was brought up Catholic.
Grandma wanted me to become a Catholic priest, Morgan. I told you that. Oh yeah, she said she wanted me to become a Catholic priest. I told her I can't marry Cassandra then. And she says they'll change that someday. And a few years ago they did. Anybody Episcopal is Episcopal, Jim can convert to Catholic and keep his wife. You didn't know that, did you? So now your Episcopal husband can bring his wife with him to the Catholic Church. Peg had a nightmare, a dream that
She's
me
gonna
and
be
Morgan
having
were going
nightmares
about
now.
becoming an Episcopal or something.
Do we sprinkle you now?
No, she came from Anabaptist, and Anabaptist poured for baptism. The early Anabaptists
Oh,
did.
did they?
Yeah, they poured. A lot of the Mennonites, and I found out a lot of their movement was in Switzerland. Bitter cold. No wonder they poured for baptism.
Right.
You had to break a hole through the ice in order to do baptizing. And you'd think they'd heat up the bath water and do something. Let's get on to the bottom of the page. Anyway, John the 15th and Gregory the 5th and Sylvester the 2nd and John the 17th and John the 18th and Sergius 4 and Benedict 8 bought the office of Pope with open bribery. This was called simony, that is the purchase of or sale of a church office with money. So simony was probably worse than their adultery. Give me money and you can become Archbishop. Me and Morty were called bishop in Bahamas, so we didn't have to pay good money for that except for airline, didn't we, Morty? But we were both called bishop, you know. And in a general term, an elder of the church is bishop with a little b, not a bishop with a big B. But anyway, page 775, we got John. He bought the
Is that what
papacy.
Trump's trying to do?
Don't know who, what,
Is
where?
that what Trump's trying to do?
Do what?
Trump.
Buy his position?
Yeah.
You don't have to buy it. You know, people are gonna. He's gonna go to the White House. He's gonna go up to the man. He says, "You're fired."
Right. Good.
Benedict IX was made pope as a boy of 12 years of age through a money bargain with the powerful families that ruled Rome. He surpassed John the 12th in wickedness. He committed murders and adulteries in broad daylight. robbed pilgrims on the graves of the martyrs. A hideous criminal, the people drove him out of Rome. Some called him the worst of all popes. Now who's the worst of all popes?
Let's see, John the
Benedict.
Benedict IX. And remember how one of our recent popes was called Benedict? They like that name?
That's right.
Now this Benedict IX was the worst of the worst.
Wow.
Now I showed, those that are new to this class, I showed them in Vatican City there is a Franciscan friar, Anglican priest or Jesuit priest that's got in his hands the writs of the Catholic Church, and they got under his feet, trodden under the Word of God, trampling the scrolls, and bloody martyr was underneath his feet. And it's still, that statue's still there in the Vatican, showing Catholics punching underfoot, crunching underfoot, under the boots of the Catholic Church. Now, we go on to the other, Gregory, and he brought the papacy, 3 rival popes. Now this is neat. You had 3 rival popes, Benedict IX, Gregory VI, and Sylvester III. Remember how they used to have this TV program where, you know, with a real Lone Ranger, you know, please stand up. And, you know,
All right.
and they always had 3 different people, and they were all, one was telling the truth and the other 2 were lying.
Yeah, that's
Oh.
And then the panel had to figure out to tell the truth who was the real Lone Ranger or who was the real. There was one guy who was the Franklin W. Dixon, who was Leslie McFarlane, a Canadian writer that wrote a lot of storybooks. He even wrote some Nancy Drew books under the title Kathleen Keene. So he wrote a few Kathleen Keene, Nancy Drew books, and he wrote probably the first 22 Hardy Boy books. And he's got $100, $150 a book, and the Straightmeyer said it gets sold 300 million copies
Oh my God.
over the years, and so he got his $150. It's kind of surprising too, but I've led 3 lives. How do you like this? I've led 3 lives where, will the real Pope stand up? Is it Benedict IX, Gregory VI, or Sylvester III? And now all 3 stand up. You're the Antichrist. No, you're the Antichrist. And they start throwing names at each other. Damascus II, loud protests against papal infamy and a cry for reform found answer in Hildebrand. So, you have the worst depths of papal degradation, the rule of the harlots and all. Now you've got the golden age of papal power. This is where Hildebrand, a small of stature, a little Napoleon kind of a guy, ungainly in appearance, feeble in voice, yet great in intellect, fierce in spirit, determined and zealous advocate of papal absolution, associated himself with the Reformed Party and led the papacy into its golden age. He controlled the 5 successive papal administrations immediately preceding his own, Leo IX, Victor II, Stephen IX, Nicholas, and Alexander. Now don't forget, in the 1000s was the beginning of the Crusades, the various Crusades to try to get Jerusalem back. King Richard, you know, the Lionhearted, was one of the Crusaders. Hildebrand, Pope Gregory, his great objective was to reform the clergy. Well, they needed to do some reforming. The 2 prevailing sins of the clergy were immorality and simony. Now don't get simony mixed up with sodomy, Glenn. Immorality was the adulteries, and simony was what? Buying what?
Sign off.
Buying church office. Simony was the purchase, of course, the church office with money. The church owned a large share of all property and had rich incomes. Practically all bishops and priests had paid for their office, for it gave them a chance to live in luxury. Kings habitually sold church office to the highest bidder, regardless of fitness or character. This brought Pope Gregory VII into bitter contest with Henry IV, Emperor of Germany. He deposed Gregory. Gregory in turn excommunicated and deposed Henry. Okay, I'm the Pope, and you oppose me. You want me, kick me out as a Pope. You're excommunicated, which means if I don't give you communion, Harriet, you go straight to hell. You don't go to purgatory. You go straight to hell. So I've got the power. This little cracker wafer is your free pass to go to heaven or at least purgatory. So But if you don't take this cracker and this sip of juice, you go straight down, and I'm going to withhold it from you, and therefore you are dead in your sins, and you're going straight to the pit. That's what excommunication is all about.
Really?
So anyway, so us Germans, I'm a proud German here, so we get excommunicated.
Whoa.
So the war followed. Between who? The Pope's armies and the German armies. Now who do you suppose is going to win?
German army.
We'll see what happens. Anyway, for years, Italy was devastated by the opposing armies. Gregory, in the end, was driven from Rome. And he died in exile. But he had, in great measure, made the papacy independent of imperial power. Repeatedly, Gregory made the papacy independent, and he called himself overlord of kings and princes, and made good his claim. Victor Urban continued war with the German emperor, became leader of the Crusade movement, which added to the papacy's leadership. And Paschal II continued war with whom? The German emperor. And that's going into the year 1118. So this is still during the Dark Ages, all this stuff was going on. Now I shared with you 4 pages out of Haley's handbook of what is, but in the Haley's handbook, he's got in here, I'm going to say probably dealing with Reformation, Protestantism, and the persecution, the martyrs and all that other. He's got probably from 873 in my book to about 900 and he's going into the Protestant, 909. He's got about 40 pages, 30-40 pages in there that carry on. I mean, I gave you some of the better part of the Haley's Handbook, but the Haley's Handbook, you've got to get an edition prior to, I think, 1963 in order to get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as far as concerning the Mr. Haley's comment on the Babylon, the great mother of harlots, and the abomination of the earth. Now, if the Roman Catholic Church, the papacy, is not Babylon, the great mother of harlots, and the abomination of the earth, then this is my question for you. Give me a better candidate. What's a better candidate?
Obama.
He's just one man. He's in there for 2 years, 4 years, 8 years. He's in, he's out. He's not around. He's not around. He's the man who's not immoral and unfaithful to his wife. He keeps his pants zipped up, so he is respectful that way, I hope. So, let's give the devil his due, Morgan.
I can't hear what you're saying.
Let's give the devil his due. He does have a pretty wife. Wait until you see Trump's first lady.
Oh, yeah. Whoa.
This came on the internet, really, Morty. You know what happened?
Forget it.
Go ahead. No, go tell
No,
me.
forget it.
No, go ahead. I'm with
No,
you.
no, I'll just wait, go ahead.
No, I'm with you, man.
No, I'm not going to ask you
We
to
know.
consider this.
You doing this?
Forget it.
All right.
There
Here
we
I saw
go.
the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses, and when I saw her, I wondered greatly. And I shared with you how many were murdered, how many tens of millions were murdered under the Caesars, and how many 70 million were murdered by the papacy. Bloody Mary got her name Bloody Mary for a reason. And here's the Dark Ages, Revelation chapter 11, the apostate church gloating over the death of the true church, a time of great despair and confusion. And here the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when you see the beast, and he was, and is not, and will come. Now, this is one interpretation we shared with you as far as the 7-headed beasts. Some would say it was the different powers of the tribunes and the decemvirs and the emperor and the various ones. And this is another interpretation where it's Egypt, Assyrian, Medo-Persian, Babylon, Greece, Rome, the Holy Roman. And it says there's 7 heads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th is, and the one is, when this is out, then there's going to be the 7th, the Holy Roman Empire. And that is one of the historical discussions in this particular. And here we talked about 7 kings have fallen, and one is, and the other has not yet come. So Rome is, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. And these are the governmental powers. And we shared with you some of the early church fathers in the years of the 400s prayed that the Roman Caesars and the stability of the Roman Empire would maintain. And they prayed for peace, that Roman Pax Romana would remain. And they asked the churches to pray, because they knew that whenever the Goths and Visigoths came in and plundered Rome, it was going to be a hard time not only for the neighborhood, it was going to be a hard time with the church, because the church is going to be doing double time, taking care of the wounded and taking care of the orphans and taking care of the widows. And he says, let's pray that these winds of God's judgment are held off. And so this is the beast which was and is not, and is himself also an 8th, and it is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. And we discussed that in the past with the rise of the various Goths, Visigoths, Rule-Adocer, and others that took over and divided Rome actually into 10 provinces. They had their own goals. And then you have these are going to make a war against the Lamb will overcome them. Now this is the good thing. During the time of the martyrdom, remember earlier chapters of Revelation, Lord, how long, how long, how long? He says, there's got to be some more people got to die. Oh, thanks. Lord, hold them back. Finally, when the basin's full of blood of the martyrs, God's going to pour out his wrath on the papacy. And the same kind of judgment that God brought against the Roman Caesars, we saw he brought the same judgment through the Napoleonic Wars on the rivers and on the lakes and on the ocean and on the land and out of the air, that Napoleon destroyed the papacy and all its imperial Holy Roman Catholic Empire. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are people and multitudes and nations and tongues. And then we're talking about in the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot, will make her desolate, naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. So here you're going to find that the beast is going to make war. There's a war between the different Romes. The woman whom you saw is the great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Is this city New York City, Washington, D.C., Moscow? Is it Paris? Is it Hamburg, Germany? Is it Cairo, Egypt, Alexandria? What city, what's the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth?
Jerusalem.
Would it be Jerusalem?
Washington,
Or would it be Washington?
No.
Or would it be
Plant City.
Plant City? That's the best guess yet, Rome. Sandy, who'd you say it'd be?
I say it would be Rome, definitely.
Be Rome. Now, the historicists look at Rome as being the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. The premillennial will take the position, this is Jerusalem ruling over the world. This is going to be the capital. And they're going to restore the temple and animal sacrifice in Jerusalem in the future from this date.
Animal sacrifice?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's why I scratched my head on that interpretation of Revelation, Morgan, and that interpretation of end times. Because if they're going to restore animal sacrifice in Jerusalem, what does that do with the book of Hebrews, book of Galatians, book of Romans? That Jesus once for all was sacrificed once for all. And if he was sacrificed once for all, why bring back animal sacrifice? Now the Samaritans, those few hundred Samaritans that still do animal sacrifice. And some of these guys in the Haitian movement, that they still butcher chickens. And they don't eat them, they leave them over in homeland. You know where homeland is? Between Bartow and Fort Meade. Yeah, the voodoo guys, I had the cemetery caretaker come up to me and was selling a stone up there. So I've seen the strangest thing. There's this dead chicken hanging on a tombstone. He says, it's part of the voodoo of the Haitians. It's part of their Santeria, I think is what it's called, where they still offer animal sacrifice. So nothing's new. But we have this woman. We had chapter 17. Did we go through 18?
No.
No.
We just read 17.
Okay. Okay, we're going to have to go to 18 next week. We'll go to 18 next week. We'll save that for a little bit. Chapter 18. There's one study I want to share with you. It's a brief study. Will, I'm going to borrow you again. Let's see, everybody gets one of these. Sandy, turn to Luke 21:24.
They're looking for
They will
it, Sharon.
fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all
It's the
nations.
police.
Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
Okay, read that all over again, Sandy, louder.
Okay. And they will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
Okay, Donald Hunt was one of our professors in Iowa. He passed away. Jamaica was his last mission trip. But it's fine. And he shared this information with us, and I think it was a chapel where he talked about Jerusalem and prophecy. And this was Don's understanding of it as he shared it with us. And I was like 18 years old, 19 years old when I put this chart together. And so you got this chart. This chart happens to be 50 years old, Peg. No, I mean, I did this chart when I was 18 years old. That shows you how far back it was. These are my notes. And in Luke 21, he talks about the destruction of Jerusalem, which we may dedicate a class to, just to give some background later on as an after or as an appendix to our study of Revelation. But Jerusalem, Jesus says, you better hope you're not pregnant, women. And you better hope it's not during the winter. And you better hope, whatever. Now he says, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. One stone's not going to be left on top of another. Happened in 70 AD. And Jesus says, you're not even going to be able to rebuild your city. And they tried to rebuild it after it was destroyed. And when the guys are doing picks and shovels, chipping the granite, it sparked. And there's a lot of methane gas underneath. And you know what happens when a spark hits methane gas? Hallelujah. And you had entire work crews getting blown up trying to rebuild Jerusalem. And so they hindered. And then the Roman Caesars deliberately built a pagan shrine on top of Golgotha, where that was Jesus' place of the crucifixion. And they built a pagan temple right on top of that. You know why they did that? It was to,
We beat you.
yeah, just to say, we detest you, and we beat you. But what they did, when they built a temple on top of Golgotha, they preserved the site. And the process of preserving the site, when Helena came through, Constantine's mother, she built, churches in that area and notated these particular sites. And there's two Golgothas, there's a Catholic tradition and a Protestant tradition. One's inside the city gate, one's outside. But anyway, look at the times of the Gentiles. Now, from 70 to 330, which was Constantine, Rome was the center. And Rome controlled Jerusalem. It was under Rome's thumb, or under its boot. 330, we have what Christian emperor comes on the scene. His name is? Who was it?
Constantine.
Constantine. And his head city is called Constantinople. He built a beautiful, or his mother Helena built a beautiful cathedral there. What was it? St. Sophia Cathedral. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then whenever the Islam people took over, the Ottoman Turks and the Islam, they turned the whole thing into a mosque, an Islam mosque. And they have that tendency to try to do one in New York City, close to the World Trade Center. And the thing is, this is where, normally unions are not always our favorite guys, but the union refuses to give any building supplies to anybody who wants to build a mosque near 911.
Amen.
And the insurance owns the other half of the building, is not giving up their half of the building for them to build a mosque. And me and Will were going to go to New York City and kill a little pig and bury it there on the property so that it would be polluted forever, because you can't have bacon. Harriet, we should have taken your pig. You should have taken your pig and taken it up to New York City near the World Trade Center and buried it where those Islam want to build their mosque, and buried your pig right there. It would have been a noble cause.
She's only been in the ground for like 2 days.
Well, we could dig her up and take her down and she can continue the course. They'll never build an Islam mosque in New York City if we do that. Now, Will, if you really want to get into trouble, now you do not learn this from pastor. You do this all on your own. But if you bury a pig, you just, I don't know. Then in 634 to 1099, Mohammedanism comes over and takes over for the next 500 years, and they control Jerusalem. And in 1099 to 1268, for at least 200 years or 169 years, you have the Catholic Crusades that control Jerusalem, and the Arabs under Saladin. And I'll share with you, the Saladin is regarded more highly by Western historians and by Christian historians than among his own peers. The own peers have no regard for him. They just figure he's a minor player in the story of life. But Saladin was the one who allowed everybody to pay tribute, leave Jerusalem with their weapons, and those that didn't were sold into slavery. Then for the next bunch of years, 1268 to 1517, you had the Egyptians maintain. In 1517, the Turks came in. This is where your Ottoman and your Turkish Empire. This is where your Caliphate and all the other. But your Turks were ruling from 1517 to 1918. And then from 1918 to when was World War I?
14, 17, 18.
1914 to 1917 or 1918?
1913 to 1918.
Okay, 1913, 1918, World War I. This is where the Turks lost their control, and this is where Allenby comes in. He's the Field Marshal Allenby. He comes into Alexandria, he comes into Nazareth, he takes Jerusalem, and returns Jerusalem back to Western control. And our preacher, C. Vincent Hall, who was the dig cook on the Carter Expedition, he was the co-founder for Jamaica Bible Seminary, he was the chaplain for Allenby, and he was the one who addressed tens of thousands of African Corps and Israel Corps troops of the British Army. Many Jamaicans were there, about 20,000 Jamaicans in the midst of all these. And he tells the soldiers the reason for the conquest and returning Israel back to the Western control rather than under the Turkish and the Ottoman Islam. They didn't understand the significance. And so C. Vincent Hall was the chaplain of the hour. Later on, he became an evangelist for the Churches of Christ in Jamaica. And he called Luke Elliott to come down and start the Bible College. And that was back in 1937, 39, 45, in between World War II. And I took over the college in 1998. So I've got roots all the way back to World War I, and my chaplain who had to tell the troops what it's all about. Then from 1918 to 1948, England ruled until they had what they called the Zionist movement and became the State of Israel. And the day after the Israel was declared a state, they were immediately at war. And later on, you had the 7 Days War. They actually had 10 years of war back and forth. They still fight. Remember, they talk about peace, but there's no peace. But the Israeli, they're democracy. And I saw a film clip of the reason why Israel wants the boundaries, what they require. And you know, the present administration of America says you gotta give up this, you gotta give up that to get peace with these guys. And one thing I want to share with you, the Palestinians are a peace-loving people. Very peace-loving. Who's the Palestinian terrorists? What are their names?
Hamas.
What are they called?
Hamas.
Hamas. Okay, the Hamas are a peace-loving people. And ISIS, they are peace-loving people too. They want a piece of Egypt, and a piece of Syria, and a piece of Lebanon, and a piece of Jerusalem, and a piece of Israel, and a piece of Iraq, and a piece of Iran, and a piece of
A piece of America.
horseflesh, and a piece of America. And they got their peace in Dearborn, Michigan. And they got their peace here too in Lakeland, Florida. And I took pictures of the Mohammedan temple in Mohammedan mosque in Jamaica. I have to show that to you one Sunday morning when I'm going off on my hobby horse about the Islam are peace-loving people. Then in 1967 you have the 7-Day War.
Well,
As a matter of humor, not seriousness, you know why the war only lasted 7 days, Morgan?
yes, because the Israelites just whipped them to pieces.
No, the real reason is that they rented their weapons. They had to turn them in Saturday, you know, as a Sabbath, so they had to get their weapons used.